All right, well, there's been so much talk on the Paris attacks on November 13th. One of the things I wanted to look into was the movie The 33. It came out on the same day. Um, a lot of interesting things about this movie, I guess, dealing with earthquakes. But anyway, first thing I want to point out, the two main guys that at least I know, or the main stars, are Antonio Banderas and also Lou Diamond Phillips. All these other people, never heard of them in my life. But who knows? Maybe other people have. Antonio Banderas is definitely the star of the movie. First off, he plays Mario, whatever, how you say that name. And then, just look at this. He plays this guy, adds up to 62. Antonio Banderas adds up to 62. The miners were even trapped for 69 days, which adds up to 62. Another thing about Antonio Banderas is I've been mentioning Philadelphia over and over and over. Seems like it's just so coded to Philadelphia, whatnot. And the first film that I remember him being in was the movie Philadelphia. He was Tom Hanks' gay boyfriend. And it actually is his breakout role, or his first major role. Philadelphia. Even says Banderas then broke through to mainstream American audiences in the film Philadelphia. And of course, it's about AIDS. We talked about the Charlie Sheen stuff and how the AIDS and how it ties into Team America and whatnot. But let's go back here. The other guy, Lou Diamond Phillips, then. I guess first off, Lou Diamond Phillips plays Don Lucho in this movie. Don Lucho adds up to 92, just like Lou Diamond Phillips. So, there's no doubt they chose these people to play these characters by the numbers. Also, while I'm thinking about it, the is a 33 word, so literally, it's the 33, the 33 even. Super important number, but I want to move on. Lou Diamond Phillips, then, honestly, I remember him from very few movies as well. Literally, La Bamba, where he plays Richie Valens. I'm pretty sure I even have a video on the death of Buddy Holly and Richie Valens in The Big Bopper, all tying into Buddy Holly's song That'll Be the Day That I Die. It even ties into the Skull and Bones and whatnot. But moving on, the other movie that I remember this guy in is Young Guns. And he's in a lot of other movies that other people remember. These two just stick out to me. Young Guns, who it also stars Charlie Sheen and Emilio Estevez. It's all about Billy the Kid and whatnot. And there's a lot more I could probably talk about that movie. Just want to mention a few things that actually tie into Philadelphia once again. So, Billy the Kid. Well, for one, interesting, it says alternatively born on November 23rd, which is today. Just kind of weird that I would look at it today. Which also could be like 9/23 and whatnot. But he died at the age of 21, and he supposedly shot 21 people. He was also 5'8", which ties into earthquakes that I'm going to mention here in a second. But the 21 has to do with February 1st is 2/1, and then there's 333 days remaining. We've talked about a lot to do with Philadelphia. This year, on October 27th, was the 333rd anniversary of Philadelphia. And on November 29th, here to 6 days, it'll be 33 days after the 333rd anniversary, which is also the 333rd day of the year. So interesting, the two stars of the movie The 33, one has ties to Charlie Sheen and the other one has ties to the movie Philadelphia about AIDS. And Charlie Sheen just announced that he had AIDS, or HIV. Anyway, this film is based off of a true story about the 2010 mining accident, or the 2010 Chilean mining accident where the 33 miners got trapped. The most interesting thing that I've noticed was that it began on August 5th, which is 8/5, like an 85. And I noticed a lot of 85 and 58 references around earthquake stuff. Also, just recently, Chile had the worst earthquake of the year. And it was an 8.3. It was this one. I talked about how originally it was reported Santiago, Chile, which added up to 60. There was a ton of other 60 references. Um, Even like Flip Saunders died at the age of 60. I'm not even going to pull it up. But what's interesting about it is this earthquake was on 9/16, and if you go to the day that the movie The 33 came out, it's a span of 58 days. Now, this mining accident doesn't necessarily have anything to do with an earthquake, but it just seems kind of similar. They're in the mine, the collapse, whatever. They also mentioned the 2010 Chile earthquake that happened 6 months before the accident. So, this earthquake just seems pretty interesting. It even mentions the earthquake generated a blackout that affected 93% of the Chilean population. Just interesting, a blackout, and I'll show you that in a second. We've been talking about blackouts a whole bunch of times for a few months now, but the earthquake was on 2/27, an interesting day in itself. It all has to do with pi, with Valentine's Day, the number 49. I mean, I've mentioned it a whole bunch of times, but you go from that earthquake to 10/27/2015, which is the day Philadelphia became 333 years old. It's a span of 5 years and 8 months, kind of like 58. Interesting, too, this is the last day in Back to the Future. In 1985, when the train destroys the time machine and then Doc Brown comes back in the train. It's all about the Philadelphia train wreck has been supercoded to the Pope's visit and whatnot. It's also 2015, the Back to the Future Part 2, they go to 2015 and Biff steals the Gray's Sports Almanac, and he wins all of his money on the 85th day of the year in 1958. The guy who plays Biff Tannen is even from Philadelphia. Literally his name, Thomas Francis Wilson. I can't even talk. Thomas Francis Wilson even adds up to 85, just like Biff Tannen. If you add the junior on there, it adds up to 266. Pope Francis is the 266th Pope. September 23rd is the 266th day of the year. Pope Francis, it's also 9/23. The Philadelphia train wreck happened at 9:23 p.m. Pope Francis went to the White House at 9:23 a.m. on 9/23. He came to the United States on his 923rd day as Pope. Also, in regards to blackout, blackout adds up to 85. And then even with stuff with earthquake, Richter scale, 58. Seismograph, 58. A lot of people, when they mention California and the earthquakes, they always talk about how it's the big one is inevitable. Man, I cannot talk today, but the big one, 85. Even the guy who invented the Richter scale, he died in the year 1985 at the age of 85. Even look at the history of seismology. It says whatever traced back to antiquity. Early speculations on the natural causes of earthquakes were included in the writings of Thales of Miletus. Look at the year, 585 BCE. I mean, come on. The history goes back clear to this guy in 585. So also the worst recorded earthquake ever was in 1960 in Chile. And I've talked about some of these before. I just want to move on. So the next worst earthquake ever was the 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake, the one that caused the big tsunami and whatnot. But I mean, look at the origin time, 58 minutes into the day. Also interesting, the magnitude of 9.1. I've been mentioning 91 over and over, dealing with elimination, death, destruction, whatever. Also, the month of November, in Pythagorean gematria, if you do the V exception where V is still 22 instead of 4, it even adds up to 58. And I only mention that because we're in the month of November right now, the 33 came out on November 13th. Now, the reason that I mention a lot of this is because I talked about how it seemed like a West Coast earthquake is too obvious, and I looked at the history of some of the earthquakes on the East Coast, because it just doesn't seem like you hear about it that often. And one of them was felt in Philadelphia. There was articles about how it scared people in Philadelphia. In 2011, it was this earthquake. It was a magnitude 5.8. It also even says stuff like, occurred no farther than 58 kilometers from the epicenter. Landslides occurred no farther than 58 kilometers from the epicenter. And also what was weird about the East Coast was the last time that the worst earthquake happened was in 1944, and it was also a 5.8. And I mentioned a bunch of stuff about the number 44. Earthquake adds up to 44. I even talked about Hulk Hogan when earthquake sat on his ribs and whatnot. Lupercalia adds up to 44. A lot of stuff is tied back to Lupercalia. Obama is the 44th president, and we've mentioned a lot about him being assassinated possibly. Interesting too, the third president to be assassinated was William McKinley. Literally, William McKinley died at the age of 58, and if you even write President McKinley in gematria, it adds up to 85. But anyway, this was the earthquake in 1944. Like I said, it was also a 5.8. Interesting too, it was on September 5th, and the other one was on October 27th. Actually, October 23rd. It's 13 days apart. Gregorian to Julian, they would be the same day. But the 5.8 stuff, this was a 5.8. The one, Mineral, Virginia was a 5.8. And the worst ever earthquake recorded on the East Coast was this one, the 1886 Charleston earthquake. Interesting, the coordinates too, 32.9, kind of like 923 backwards. Also reminds me of this earthquake that happened in Nepal this year that says it killed over 9,000 people and injured more than 23,000, kind of like the 923 reference. Then it had an aftershock on the same day as the Philadelphia train wreck. That was a big destructive one as well. But if you go from the 1886 one to the one in 1944, they literally happened 58 years and 5 days apart even. Also interesting, Oklahoma just had the earthquake, the 4.7 earthquake, just the other day. Can't even remember what day it was, but I looked up the fault lines by Oklahoma or whatever. This is Nemaha Ridge. It talks about Oklahoma all the way up to Omaha, whatever. But Nemaha Ridge, 85. Also, many people blame the ones in Oklahoma on fracking, which is actually called hydraulic fracturing. And hydraulic fracturing adds up to 101, just like Philadelphia. Interesting too, Philadelphia Bridge in Pythagorean gematria adds up to 101 as well. I mentioned a lot of stuff with bridge. Even the Roanoke, Virginia shooting was all about, they had on the screen, it said Bridgewater, or it said Franklin Bridgewater. They were foreshadowing the Ben Franklin Bridge that's in Philadelphia. Because even at the bottom of the screen, the thing that was going across was talking about the NASCAR guy who died in Philadelphia. And I mean, Bridgewater even adds up to 58. Allison Parker adds up to 58. She was one of the main things that everyone talked about. Interesting too, Monetta, Virginia to Mineral, Virginia, where the earthquake was, 139 miles. Freemasonry adds up to 139. It even says right now 2 hours, 23 minutes, like Skull and Bones. Skull and Bones and Synagogue of Satan and whatnot. It's all coded into all of these things. Clear back even to all of the president assassinations, I noticed, even with the number 91 and 149. Even a bunch of the terrorists, they went to Falls Church, Virginia, right before 9/11. But I wanted to point out, Allison Parker, it says, attended James Madison University. And James Madison University, it even mentions about how they're one of the few colleges that have a Phi Beta Kappa. And I talked about how Skull and Bones was actually formed after this society that will be 239 years old on December 5th, which is the 923 on the Hebrew calendar. Also ties into the Philadelphia train wreck. It's the mirrors. Even came there on October 2nd. And 8/5 to October 2nd is a span of 58 days. Mascots even Duke, the dog or whatever. And we've mentioned tons of stuff about Lupercalia and whatever. Makes me wonder if that's why Duke University, another reason why they won the NCAA tournament this year. They were also involved in that Miami play in football this year. But James Madison, look at this, died at the age of 85. So the Chile earthquake this year was this day, and it's 85 days to this day which is also 21 days left until the end of the year. And the Chilean miners were saved on this day, which is 58 days worth.